This is a meeting of the House Ways and Means Committee. We'll get started. We got one pretty long bill we're going to be doing, but first we're going to have first readers. House Bill 211 by Representative Benton.
House Bill 211 by Representative Benton, motor fuel excise tax, public school systems under certain circumstances, so forth.
Public Finance and Policy Subcommittee. Representative Benton, if you would give us a brief explanation of what your bill seeks to do, sir. So if you turn your mic back toward you. Yeah.
It seeks to just cut out the excise tax that schools are paying right now. We have cut back on school systems for several years, and we thought this might be a small way of bringing back a little bit of money to them. I did give a fiscal note to the bill. So,
questions of the author? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
House Bill 295 by Representative Battles.
HB 295, Representative Battles, ad valorem taxation and provide comprehensive revision and provisions and so forth.
Ad valorem Subcommittee. Representative Battles.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill is a revision of really Title 48, having to do, after much work with a number of people, county commissioners, tax assessors, tax commissioners. This would be a comprehensive revision of ad valorem taxation, assessments, and appeals. Also, it talks about the revision of certain provisions relating to county boards of equalization, and also the ad valorem tax appeals. So this is a complete revision of that code section, that title section.
Any questions of the author by members of the committee? I see none. Thank you, Representative Battle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
House Bill 299, Representative Watson.
HB 299, Representative Watson, tax returns, contributions, Special Olympics Incorporated, and so forth.
Income Tax Subcommittee, chaired by Chairman J. Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I bring before you today House Bill 299, which is a bill to allow the people of Georgia to make a charitable contribution to the Special Olympics of Georgia on their tax return each year. This bill would impact over 24,470 athletes with intellectual disabilities in Georgia and provide more opportunities for them to realize their potential, develop physical fitness, demonstrate courage, and experience joy and friendship. We currently allow this for 8 other groups, such as the Georgia Wildlife Federation Fund, Georgia Children and Elderly Fund, and the Georgia Cancer Research Fund.
Questions of the author? Representative Pack has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Watson, thank you very much. One question I have, how did you choose this organization versus the thousands of others that you seem to me is well-deserving of this special status?
This organization came to us and asked for this to be listed on the tax return.
I see no further questions. Thank you, Representative Watson. House Bill 300, Representative Mayo. Is Representative Mayo or his designee? House Bill 304, Representative McCall. Yes, Representative Black is going to present the bill. Mr. Vice Chair.
Yes, HB 304, Representative McCall, Freeport exemption, applicability to fertilizer production process, and so forth.
Ad valorem Subcommittee, chaired by Representative Chairman Paul Battles. You may proceed, Mr. Representative Black.
Yes, sir. This is a bill that will not change anything what's been done in the past. We've just had a couple of situations where some lawyers have come up with a different interpretation of what we've had in the past as far as whether or not the materials used in the blending fertilizer operations was a finished product or not, and would be exempt from ad valorem taxes as they have in the past.
Any questions of the author by any member of the committee? Seeing none, thank you, sir. House Bill 307, Representative Peak.
HB 307, Representative Peak, state income tax credits for bad debts from private label credit cards, et cetera, so forth.
Income Tax Subcommittee, Chairman J. Powell. You may proceed.
Mr. Chairman, this is Georgia bad debts legislation. It's a relief for sales tax paid on private label credit cards for, say, like a Home Depot or a Macy's, JCPenney's. Amounts are charged off as bad debt. It would allow the business to be able to file a refund with the Department of Revenue when a bad debt upon which they had collected, which they had paid sales tax to the Department of Revenue but never collected from the customer, they would be able to file a refund with the Department of Revenue for that sales tax.
Question of the author. Seeing none, thank you, Representative Peak. House Bill 308, Representative Peak.
Representative Peak, Georgia Prosperity Through Preservation Act, so forth.
Income Tax Subcommittee, Chairman J. Powell.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, this is a bill we passed several years ago, a Prosperity Through Preservation Act that allowed tax credits for rehabilitation of historic homes in our state. It has been met with tremendous success, but there was a cap, a maximum of $250,000. This takes the cap off and increases the cap to $5 million, so we can look at some bigger opportunities, bigger projects that could be done in our state.
Questions of the author? See none. Thank you. House Bill 348, Representative Parsons. I saw him come in and out. Is he?
Yeah, I'm right here.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Excuse
HB
me.
348, Representative Parsons, income tax credit, purchasers of alternative fuel vehicles, and so forth.
Income Tax Subcommittee, Chairman J. Powell. Representative Parsons, you may explain your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill would provide a $2,500 tax credit for the purchase of a new commercial vehicle that would use CNG, compressed natural gas fuel. There'd be it would be $10 million per year for 5 years, starting in 2014, fiscal year 2014. The bill describes 3 different sizes of commercial vehicles, and it also describes how the Revenue Department would go about providing the tax credit.
Any questions of the author? Seeing none, thank you, Representative Parsons. Representative House Bill 351, Representative Carson.
HB 351, Representative Carson, state income tax. Certain entities may pay tax on recaptured credits, so forth. And I'm gonna present. He asked me to present if that's okay.
Representative Peak will present the bill on behalf of Representative Carson.
This bill, it permits entities which receive and pass through Georgia low-income housing tax credits to its taxpayer owners to provide these same entities with an election to pay any recapture tax on any recapture of those same credits at the entity level.
Any questions? Representative Peak. Seeing none, thank you, Representative Peak. That concludes our first readings and assignment to subcommittees. We will now take up House Bill 266 by Representative Peak.
It's 351. Income tax.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm going to ask John and Amy from the Department of Revenue to come join me or be close by in case there are questions that members of the committee may have for them. This is probably the most exciting and dynamic piece of legislation that we do every year. It's the update on the state tax code to the Internal Revenue Code. And let me tell you, it is some thrilling stuff. You'll just bear with me.
Representative Peak, for clarification, this is House Bill 266.
Yes, sorry.
By substitute LC 343746S. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, sir. Sorry.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
You may proceed.
Thank you for correcting me. I'm going to just walk you through the different sections, and if, Mr. Chairman, if it's all right, I'll kind of go through each section and then stop and see if there's some questions, because they each kind of deal with different issues.
That'd be fine.
But Section 1 incorporates in tax code all of the 2012 and early 2013 changes to the federal income tax code, which we've adopted in the past, with the 3 following exceptions, and I'll go over those real quick. And it's important to note that these 3 have never been adopted. First is the increase of the maximum allowable deduction for Section 179 property to $500,000, and an increase of the phase-out threshold to $2 million. We will not be doing that in Georgia Code. We will instead be having a Section 179 deduction maximum of $250,000 with a phase-out threshold of $800,000. Just for clarification, Section 179 deduction is when you buy a piece of equipment. If we build a Cheddar's and spend $500,000 on equipment, Section 179 property is property that is allowed to be immediately deducted, not over a certain period of time, but immediate deduction. It's a pretty good incentive for small business investment, but the limitation in not matching the federal code is because of the significant cost it is to Georgia taxpayers. It would be about an extra $35 million next year alone, and most of the deduction is taken from $0 to $250,000 for most small businesses. The second exception is the expansion of the definition of Section 179 property to include qualified real property. We didn't feel like that buying a piece of real estate should qualify for the Section 179 deduction. Didn't feel like that was a smart thing, and it also is a cost of $26 million to the Treasury. The third exception, which is not changed, is the accelerated depreciation on autos, and if you'll look on the schedule, I'm not sure if the schedule was given to everyone, but it's a rather large hit, about $252 million to the state treasury if we were to adopt this accelerated depreciation and additional first-year bonus depreciation. So those are the 3 exceptions that we will not be including into the Georgia tax code that were adopted by the Internal Revenue Service. There's one other piece in this Section 1, and it's a little tricky, so stay with me. There were pensions for bankruptcy airline employees. Pensions for bankrupt airline employees were forced to be put into a Roth retirement program over the last 3 to 4 years, which caused a taxable event. Federal tax law was then changed to allow these pension programs to be put into an IRA, which is not a taxable event, therefore allowing these employees to make a claim for a refund because the transfer became a non-taxable event. This change in state law makes the law consistent with federal law and allows the affected taxpayers to seek a refund for their Georgia tax, which they were forced to pay over the last 3 or 4 years as a result of this change. So, but we're putting in code that they're not eligible for interest on this money. It is just they will have the ability to be able to seek a refund for pensions that they were forced to put into a Roth IRA, Roth account over the last 3 or 4 years. I know it's a little confusing. Does that make sense? And I'm glad to answer some questions. That's all in Section 1. So. Section 2, and we'll come back if there's some other questions. Last year we passed a new withholding benefit for research and development credit. The law had an existing benefit that applied only to startups in the first 5 years. We expanded that in 2012 to all companies, beginning with credits earned in the 2012 tax year. This was to be a further incentive to companies to increase their research and development spending in Georgia, even if they couldn't use the research and development credits against corporate income tax because they were in a loss situation. Maybe they didn't have a profit, but they could still use the credit against withholding taxes. We did not intend, and this is important, we did not intend to allow approximately $100 million of carryover research and development credits earned in income tax years prior to 2012 to qualify for the withholding benefit. And this bill just makes that clear. If we do not, this matches the intent of what the legislation we passed last year to make it clear that we would not apply this $100 million, these credits against prior year research and development credits. So if we don't, it's going to cost the state treasurer about $100 million. That's the purpose behind it. Section 3, sales tax exemptions related to agricultural products. It clarifies that on-road motor fuels, which are subject to prepaid state tax, are excluded from the definition of energy used in agriculture. The energy exemption still applies to numerous other fuels that are used in agriculture, such as off-road diesel, propane, butane, electricity, natural gas, wood, and certain other fuels. It requires that a taxpayer must choose to avail themselves to either the manufacturing exemption or the agriculture exemption, but not both in a given year. This is the best example I can give you is gas in the truck. Just make sure that a farmer who uses his truck not primarily on the farm, but maybe uses his truck to drive up and see grandma, doesn't get an exemption for the gas that he puts in that truck. Just clarifies that. Section 4 is the burden of proof section. It requires the good faith standard for acceptance of an exemption certificate by a seller when making a tax-exempt sale. Selling dealers will be relieved of liability when making a tax-exempt sale when they accept an exemption certificate in good faith from the purchaser. This requires that selling dealers to obtain the appropriate exemption certificate for the type of exempt sale. For example, obtaining the gate card, which many of you are familiar with, which is what folks who are seeking an exemption from sales tax for products used in the agricultural process obtain a gate card to exempt sales tax to agricultural producers. This provides efficiencies for the Department of Revenue to audit fewer taxpayers for compliance related to the appropriate use of a tax-exempt certificate. Best example I can give you this. A farmer comes in and says, well, I want to buy a post for my farm, of which is a tax-exempt, because he has the gate card, therefore is a tax-exempt transaction. But he also, at the same store, there's a pair of boots there. And he decides that, well, once he tells the dealer, well, I have this gate card, why don't you just exempt the boots from the sale too? And which unfortunately has been happening in our state. And this puts the burden back on the retailer to have a good faith standard, which he would be required to be able to know what's exempt from sales tax and what's not. And that's just puts that good faith standard back in code. And Section 5 is basically just the section that makes this all this effective from January 1, 2012 on. Mr. Chairman, I know it's quick, and I know it's technical, and I know it's boring, and I'll be more than glad to answer questions about it if need be.
Thank you, Representative Peake, and thank you for taking on this project.
And thank you for giving it to me, Mr. Chairman. I'm so grateful for this opportunity to.
I'm a great delegator, I think,
Yes,
as you know.
You're a few other things, but I can't call you that in the committee. So,
Representative Battles has the question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The gate card is, and I purchase a number of things from our local feed and seed, and one of the things they always ask me, do you have your gate card? I don't know how many times I've said I don't qualify for a gate card. When you said there is a list of those items that are eligible for that exemption, is that supplied to each one of the retail vendors?
I will defer that question to Amy, who is our sales tax guru, and you want to take a crack at that one?
Excuse me, if you would come up here, we're being recorded or something.
The department has posted a list of eligible and non-eligible items on our website and an informational bulletin. In addition, we have a very comprehensive regulation in proposed form that will be revised once again based on public comment we received that provides even more detail about what does and does not qualify.
And may I ask one question?
Yes,
follow
sir.
up on that. What is that process of application for that card?
Someone who believes they're eligible for the agricultural exemption will apply through actually the Department of Agriculture. They apply online or through paper. They pay a fee of $25 or $20 depending on whether they file online or on paper. And the Department of Agriculture reviews whether or not they are eligible based on the requirements set forth in the statute. And if they qualify, then the Department of Agriculture actually issues the exemption certificate. and then the Department of Revenue then determines what items actually qualify for exemption.
All right, thank you. I know that's being gamed a good bit.
No comment.
Representative Val, we've heard rumors of such, and that's one of those reasons this legislation is before you.
This good faith standard, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes, sir.
The good faith standard, and the experts here from the Department of Revenue can tell you, it gives them a huge tool to be able to hold the retailers accountable for making sure they are giving exemptions only where it's appropriate to do so. Correct?
Representative Harrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With regard to the refunds for those that went into the pension plan, originally a Roth, and then is it voluntary now that they recharacterize as a traditional IRA, and then if they do so at that point seek the refund of taxes paid, or if originally they went to the Roth and are happy to stay there, have paid the taxes, may they remain in that vehicle?
My understanding, I'll defer to John on this one if I say it incorrectly, but that they were forced to roll it into a Roth retirement program originally, and then they were given the option to roll it into an IRA.
Okay.
And so, yes, it will be up to them to choose to go seek the refund. Is that correct, John? Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's correct. The only thing you might note, I think federally they had to do certain things by a certain date, and that date's already expired, so they would have already done it. But they did, as near as we can tell, it was something that they had to elect to do because they had to actually move the money to by a certain date, and then they had to file a refund claim by a certain date. Does that answer your question, sir? Yes.
Okay. Representative Black.
This is a question that I think is more addressed to Amy, but back to the gate tax, the list that you have on the website, how long has that been up, and when do you anticipate there may be some revisions in it?
We proposed our regulation, the first copy of our regulation last year. And don't quote me on this. It was late last year in the third quarter, probably around the October timeframe. The list of specific qualifying items and non-qualifying items is something that we put out in December, and that was in conjunction with the Department of Agriculture in response to a lot of telephone calls we were receiving. We published that list to all of our email listservs, so we keep a mailing list of tens of thousands of taxpayers. So when we put that list together, we blasted it out to everybody on our sales tax email list, which again was tens of thousands of taxpayers. In addition to that, we've been working very closely with the Department of Agriculture, who works very closely with Georgia Agribusiness and the Georgia Farm Bureau, and they've been helping to get these lists out to make sure that everybody has access to them.
When do you anticipate there may be some revisions in that?
We have some revisions now. In all honesty, we're holding off in anticipation of potential legislative changes, because if we make a fix now, it goes out for public comment for 30 days. If a legislative fix is done, then we would do it all over again. So we have been purposefully waiting.
Okay. Thank you a lot.
Any further questions of the offer of the bill by members of this committee? I see none. What's the pleasure of the committee? Motion has been made and seconded to do pass by committee substitute House Bill 266. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. Thank you, Representative Peake.
Appreciate it.
That completes our business. Thank you all for your attendance.